He shows up the second year.
Live and learn.
All right.
Yeah, watching teams in high school. Oh yeah.
Everyone, every teacher, every kid. Nobody's just nasty. They all have
It's hard in one teacher.
You gave me a great philosophy on that one. Believe it or not.
It's long overdue.
That's where
Yes, never cut that energy.
something wrong. That's where you worry about your neck injury and all that shit. So I do have this.
His hand really just completely great.
There's some good athletes. I'm only aware of one. Basketball and baseball. He's such a big, good athlete. He turned 14 in July, so he's more like a nightmare. He's held back by a few.
I was going over to Milwaukee to catch him running his chase, and he did one big wheel section.
That's too big a player. He can play too.
Yeah, I got it. Ridiculed everyone. No, he was he was trying to be on the opposite side.
So he's like
every question, every point of question is leaving like, how can the question not be
he does. He gets who can move.
Oh, I remember
Very
He's an okay pitcher.
very Joe
Sherman was top two.
But North Carolina used to always put his next to the
Performing basketball with that size.
I don't think they started out probably.
No, let's not put that on.
But it is a coincidence. He's still working.
He's still playing.
Lost track.
Anything.
Those are all his
It was amazing house or baseball right.
Yeah, otherwise.
Postseason all-star game.
What is
that on?
We got
Not quite good. They're still learning. It's like but it's not as fun like that too. It's like more like really basketball.
Yeah.
They have their fun hard grades. It's kind of that age where it starts to ramp up.
They were going to run much. And he ran a pass play.
Oh, yeah.
Gave me a highlight. It was a touchdown. Oh, nice. Yes.
Although I think if the
It even starts to flip a little bit now.
Fox had still Dodgers, Padres matchups, and the Yankees, Kansas City, Kansas City, Cleveland,
At some point, like even next year.
Detroit.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
We believe.
yeah.
I want to go beyond that, but if I can, Cleveland, Detroit, KC, New York.
They usually
Team traded away. The best record.
It's I don't have a great answer for that.
How are they feeling about the date?
That's probably gonna be what it is. Or sign up for both.
Like on a 2080 scale, how did it feel? They were shooting the left side.
Yes, it's hard.
We get out of it.
Yeah, it stinks. One of those we lost last year. Best quarterback coach. Yeah. Last fall, basically, or second to last.
That's an answer.
And he knew he could get to football by halftime, so he was in uniform right now. So he's like, both. Sitting outside,
It's a good thing for the city to have the team do well. When I spent some time in Baltimore. And I'm gonna tell you what, if you wanted to go watch the greatest baseball team in the world, just go stick in the $3 and you go to watch a doubleheader. It was not gonna sell out.
But like, how can you look at a fresh one? I don't know. I think you can tell.
All right, now we can start. Quite an entrance.
Very full house.
Crowded, but it's national.
I think I need to add more chairs. No.
What's that?
Heck yeah. What up, Lobble?
No, it's just.
Everybody.
Sometimes you do kind of go to.
If we can do this kind of in two segments, the first, Derek will have kind of an opening, talk through some things, open it up for questions for TV purposes, and then just out of respect to the writers, we'll maybe let you guys, if you got everything that you need, Derek will address some things for just the writing press. Just there's different ways of answering some things, and once the cameras kind of get everything, and if you need one-on-ones at the end with Derek, we can, but is that fair format? Okay. And everybody saw the news and why you're here today? And Derek will address the coaching staff earlier in the week and Thad's, their decision on Thad here today. And I don't know if we need to get into the weeds too much on the season. We thought you covered that on Sunday, but we can hit on some of that. But you don't have all that much time, so we'll try to keep it moving.
But we can't get him one-on-one sometime.
If you need it, I mean,
Yeah.
he thought he'd cover everything here with his opening remarks and a few questions. There's not much more he's going to say, but if you need a one-on-one, I know you put in a request.
Yeah,
for
that'd be
He
great.
doesn't want to run from it, but he's a little tight on time, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Those were two wrestling matches. Son boys.
Yes.
When McBride decided to become a pro.
Yeah.
It was
So much shit.
a lot of there so that you could practice. So it's not like you missed all of that, but you missed. Ask him to much more.
Bright lights.
Bright lights are on. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Business casual.
It's a clubhouse. You can't be too businessy.
Nobody's wearing a tie, right?
I don't think so. Not yet.
No time. Yeah, definitely no time.
Well, I know we have end of season number of topics to discuss, but on the front end, kind of the news we shared today around Thad's departure. So, you know, I was thinking back to it, and I've had some discussions over a period of time, but over about a little over 8 years ago, I remember when I was chatting with him when he was in Texas about the opportunity here and what that could look like and the opportunities that we would have together to grow and develop. I remember asking him at the time kind of what was, why did he want to do it? Like what was interesting? How did we want to navigate it? And the growth, the opportunity, the challenge, the new, trying down a different path was something that he and I had talked a lot about. And now, 8 years later, Thad and I have had conversations for an extended period of time about his ambitions, his focuses, the things he wants to continue to do and evolve. And I think I'm not shocked at all by the comment and the way he kind of shared it in his statement today around embarking on new challenges and new opportunities. And I think that organizations evolve, people evolve. This is the way growth happens sometimes. And these conversations for he and I want to make very clear, have gone back a while. I want to say this really on the front end because I know these things in the nature of sport, and when seasons go the way they did at the end of this season, there's conversations about what does that mean from a team performance standpoint. We did not perform well. That's a collective struggle for us organizationally. That starts with me. But this has nothing to do with that. I want to make that very clear. This has nothing to do with the specifics of the way the season went. I don't want to minimize that. Obviously, we all play a role in where we got to. But I am incredibly thankful for the friendship I've shared with Thad, the partnership I've had along the way, and I'm excited for his opportunity to take on new steps in his journey and ultimately make an impact wherever he decides to make an impact, because he will. And he and I have had some good conversations about what that could be, and obviously he'll have comments at some point, I'm sure, along the way about what he wants to do next. But really at the core of it all is he's been a tremendous partner and leader here in the organization over the course of 8 years, and he's continued to impact me personally, and I look forward to supporting him personally in the next phase of his development journey and his leadership journey. So that's on the front end. I do want to shift a bit because we haven't had the chance to do media now around coaching staff and some of the decisions we made earlier this week. Rock will be available. He couldn't be available live today, in person today. But he will obviously jump on a call with the folks here. Those are difficult decisions to make. I said it when I met with a host of you on last weekend as our season was wrapping up around our coaching staff. These are things that, again, Rocco needs to speak to his thoughts on all of this because we talked about it at length with the group. These are people who are incredibly passionate about what they do. They care. They're good people. They want to continue to make an effort every day in baseball. And ultimately, when you get to the end of a season and you try and digest what went well, what didn't go well, what you could do better going forward, we had those conversations, and ultimately led to some changes on the staff with a group that ultimately around our hitting group core, and then our infield and assistant bench coach Tony Diaz. These are all tremendous individuals who I know will have an impact across baseball in different ways going forward in different capacities, likely very soon, I would imagine, because they're all very talented and have that ability. I think that at the end of the day, when we made the decision we made, to make it clear, as we were talking through it, there were just things from a performance standpoint, and as we dug deep into what we were doing, how we were doing it, that when you don't get the results you're hoping for, it's well-intentioned. It's certainly part of the process around how you put everything together, you try and evaluate, but admittedly over different stretches of time for us offensively this year, we had some struggles in a way that it felt like we had a hard time getting out of. And in baseball, this is what you have to deal with, right? In terms of you have to make difficult calls, difficult decisions based on things that transpire on the field, especially when you're not where you want to be. And those are the conversations we'll continue to have. Doesn't mean it's anyone's individual failure. It's a collective, and it starts first and foremost with me ultimately trying to figure out how we get our team back on track with where we need to get to going into next year. So with that, I'll pause. I don't think I have any other opening comments around those two items. I know we'll talk end of season, team, roster. Otherwise, that's pretty common here today, but happy to take questions.
Are you guys going to fill Thad's role with the new GM, or are his duties going to be absorbed by the people? How's that transition?
Yeah, Dan, that's a fair question. Honestly, because of the care with which I wanted to walk through some of these conversations Thad and I had, and ultimately why we had them over the course of the last few months and what that looks like, we weren't talking about that at all. This was more about kind of where he's at, what his ambitions are, what we want to do going forward, and how we set him up for that. And he and I have had that discussion for a period of time. It was not with an eye toward other changes in that sense. I will say, candidly, as I sit here today, I want to talk to Thad about some of his perspectives on things that, and we did during this period of time, but things that I could do better, in ways I could lead differently, and what are the things that we could, absorb in the group. He has that perspective, and I just think that he has that influence in that respect among our group. We've been a leadership team for a while. I know many of you who are around this group on a daily basis get that. There's a lot of people who play a role in that. I ultimately need to make the calls and the decisions around a lot of things in our baseball operation, but that has been an incredibly meaningful voice to me, obviously, over these 8 years, and ultimately so have a number of others. So it gives it. This is the part about change and evolution of an organization that opens up opportunities for some other people and what that looks like. So I don't have anything to share on that, today. That wasn't part of our thought process up until today. We want to just get to this point, get Thad, ready for his next journey, and ultimately make some of those decisions later.
To clarify then, so
Yeah.
let's say you guys win the World Series a couple weeks from now.
Yeah.
Thad is still leaving?
Yeah, I think we would still continue to have this conversation, Doogie. I think that's the one that we started 2 months ago, right, or some period of time ago, around what this looked like. So I want to make it clear, it wasn't during the stretch of games that we were struggling. In fact, actually during that time, we were all putting our heads together trying to figure out how do we help put this thing in where we need it to go. So that was the focus, and I respect the process all around between everyone within our group trying to focus on that. And then we got to the end of the season, and it's ultimately why. And when asked, I said we need to continue to have those conversations, because we were having those prior. So it was a continuation of that discussion. I don't know what would have happened at the end of the season in terms of what we would have taken as next steps. Would have loved to have had that happen, the first thing you said, and then ultimately had conversations, because I think sometimes these are about growth and career growth and development conversations that are independent of what you do on Thursday night in a game. They're more about the things that you want to achieve and what it wants to look like. So I think that's just where I sit today.
Does this conclude, from your end, the changes that you've been making?
Yeah, I think typically at the end of the season, obviously we've had some natural evolution of people in player development, and in different areas, maybe opportunities that have gone elsewhere. With people having job opportunities elsewhere, things like that. I don't expect major change in this, going forward in terms of our baseball operation. This was the admittedly and candidly, I said this to you last Sunday. Obviously, it was so hard to get to what we got to at the end of the season and the way we did, and how challenging that was for a number of people personally, myself included. And there was a moment where you just had to take a deep breath for a minute, because we were hoping that really up until that last week and that last weekend, we'd find a way to kind of have righted the ship and get ourselves to a better place. With that, we weren't having a lot of dialogue around what changes or what goes forward, and at that time, because we were so focused on that. The conversations we had around the coaching staff, and ultimately the conversation I know that I owed Thad around just where we were, big picture on the topic of today. That was the focus. So we don't have any other baseball operations related focus changes, right at this time.
Derek, almost a week ago, you played that 13-inning game with Florida, and there were a number of things that happened where you could have won the game, and some of them were fundamental, right?
Mm-hmm.
Popping up a bunt,
Sure.
not running out, last out ends with a jog, all
Yep.
that stuff. And I think a lot of fans are, you watch that and you go, how could this be September 29th and these things are still look like spring training to an extent that
Yeah.
Was that, I know it's 162 games, but was there an aha moment where you just go, this is exactly what we have to change, or we shouldn't be here?
Yeah, Max, it's a that game you're pointing to was kind of a seminal feeling moment for me, if I'm being honest, candidly, and in an odd way. Less than a week prior to that, we had another extra inning game in Boston that it felt like we were battling to the as hard as we could to the finish. And I remember post game that night in Boston feeling like this might be a turning point of sorts. Players talked about it. It was just that we fought through. We won a game that was really hard fought, and then obviously we had a tough Sunday, that doubleheader in Boston that we had, and then had the off day coming back and kind of hoping to get through that Marlins series in a place where we'd be kind of back on track, even with the struggles on Sunday. But that game, admittedly, as you said, that one stings probably. All the losses sting. That one stings probably as much as any because of all the things you just said. It's been a big part of our conversation, subsequent to the end of the season, was just feeling that. And candidly, it was everybody in that game, right? We didn't quite do the things that we should have been doing, right? And it wasn't a singular player, wasn't a veteran rookie issue. There were things that happened and I chalk some of that up to the feelings we were having at that time around that stress and that, those moments of trying to do maybe sometimes a little too much, maybe losing track of the let the game come to you and let it just happen right in front of you in those moments. But that doesn't mean there isn't, things that we could do on the front end to try and make that better. Those are areas and examples, like you just mentioned, that we have to spend time on this offseason and think about how we make sure that when you're in those crunch moments, as we were late in the season, we do those better. That's important.
Derek, when you hired David Hopkins in particular, you said that, I think the line was you wanted him to do for hitting what technology has done for pitching. Did that take place, and is this an indication of how that approach played out?
It's a good question, Phil. And David has worked incredibly hard to try and integrate. I think at the time, the way I was thinking about it, I can't remember exactly what I said from a quote standpoint, but I think as I was thinking about it, there had been in pitching for a lot of years in baseball a lot of move toward some things that were a little bit more advanced in terms of information that was being used, right, to apply to the development of pitchers. And on the hitting side, admittedly, it was probably a little bit behind that, right? We'd all say that across the industry. But that was catching up, and you were seeing more of that across the game. And Pop had a lot of those skills, and the ability to integrate some of that stuff too. I think all of that is, the way I look at it is all of those are resources, right? Just like the advent of video, when that came along, like you looked at swings differently, and then all of a sudden there's new data and technology on the field around pitch types and spin and all that. What happens there? That's the pitch FX era into the TrackMan era, right? And all those things. That's true also of the evolution of hitting, of running, of pitching is continue to evolve. So when I look back on that and I think about it now, I think we have to do a deep assessment ourselves around what skills collectively do we need to have here to serve the players to the best of their abilities. And there's 14, at the end of the season, there are 14 position players on the team, right? You usually have 13 for most rosters, but you're going to have 20 to 25, maybe 30 that show up in the big leagues over the course of a season. You're ultimately going to have to serve all of them, and all of them have different needs, and all of them have different focuses. And so we've got to figure out what's the right intersection between utilizing some of that information, which a lot of teams do well, and I think we do well in some ways that we need to be focused on some approach things that are a little bit more traditional, so to speak, in that, because that's part of it for sure. And we're focused on that too. I can assure you that this isn't just focused on the advanced information. It's how do you find the balance of both, and I think that's what we're going to continue to try and do with this group.
Tony mentioned that you said you wanted to change the infield philosophy. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit more of Rocco's, a question for Rocco around his discussion, specifically with Tony. So I think just continuing to evolve, the way we're going about some of the teaching there, some of the instruction, and what that looks like. We just felt it was the right time to make that change. But certainly maybe more of a question for Rocco. I think that conversation happened probably between Rocco and Tony.
You guys, I think, finished 10th in runs both last year and this year. Is there a feeling that there was some untapped potential left there?
Yeah, I think, Dan, that's probably the best, because I do think, seasons are defined by your end-of-year record, right? And then that's obviously our focus, right? And ultimately, you want to get to the World Series, you want to win the World Series. And then you back down every level from that, and you figure out, okay, what did you do offensively? What did you do defensively? What did the pitching look like? Starters, bullpen, and you can really get granular, and you can try and understand, okay, where did things go well? Where did things go poorly? I felt we had a really good offensive team. We felt that, from the get-go. We felt we should land, in that range of offensive teams. I think this is where sometimes runs scored in aggregate is a piece of the puzzle, but how do you approach certain situations and games that are tighter and against the best bullpen arms in the game and things like that? How do you navigate those things, and what could we have done differently or better? We all have to dive into that and think about it. You obviously empower the people that are responsible for that area to do that work, but it felt like certainly a portion of the beginning of the season, and then ultimately at the end, with us I would not have expected our offense to struggle the way it did down the stretch collectively, and that we need to own and figure out how we fix and make sure that we're in a better place going forward.
Correa spoke glowingly about Popkins, that he made an impact on him, and Correa's also talked about how he kind of likes to be involved in trade line discussions.
Yeah.
Like when you're hiring a new hitting coach and you're going through that process, is he kind of involved in that thought process at all?
Yeah, someone like Carlos, who's so advanced and has such an incredible understanding of all aspects of baseball, but certainly on the hitting side, right, and where he, his bread and butter. I think that we have already had a conversation. Rock had a conversation with him early on in this, and the thing about Carlos, and he clearly respects the work that he's done with David Popkins. He's had a number of other hitting coaches in his career that he's had that have impacted him. He also understands there's some decisions that have to be made when things have gone tough, and he respects that part of the process too. He's a class act in the way he handles all those things. The thing I think he always wants to know, and just like any other player in here, I know I'm speaking about Carlos, but this is true for anyone in this room, is do you have the resources to help me be the best player I can be, right? And ultimately, that's our mission. We have to make sure that Carlos has the resources he needs, that the other players have the resources they need, and ultimately, work with a group that can provide that, because it's no longer one single hitting coach working on this. It's a group of people that can help support that. You want to make sure you have all of those resources available. We've committed that we will have that again for Carlos for sure.
Derek, with that in mind, you look at Brooks and Royce, talented players.
Yep.
Whose confidence is probably not at an all-time high right now. How do you handle them in the off-season? Yeah. We talk mechanics, we talk analytics, but where's the confidence is something you have to,
Definitely.
How do you try to develop that in them when they have talent, and right now they're probably not feeling as good as you'd like? Yeah,
I think two guys there, some other younger guys within the group that probably went through challenges that they weren't anticipating, right? That over the course of a long season, they have a lot of ups and downs, and in some cases a lot more ups up to that point in their lives and had never experienced that. These are the moments that ultimately I think define young players' careers around how they respond. I think that the best ones that have been around, and this is the focus that we're going to have on these guys, is when things go poorly, you got to lean in. You got to find a way to kind of power through and figure out what the right next answer is. And sometimes you're going to be wrong about the path you're on, and then you got to tweak it a little bit, and you got to pivot. I think that what we're going to continue to do, work closely with those guys and among a host of others to continue to put them in positions to lean into some of the challenge that's ahead of them. It's not the first time we've seen some younger players go through struggles at the big league level. I mean, some of the best players in the game right now, when you look at some of their first 100, 200, 300 plate appearances, they went through those struggles. This level has never been harder, and I think maybe this level has never been harder than it is relative to AAA than it is right now, just because of how much good pitching there is out there. I think that's our focus, is to try and get those guys not just mechanically sound and focused on the right approach and all the things that they need to do from a hitting standpoint. It's to get their mind where it needs to be, so they know they can go, because they have the talent and the ability to do it. It's just about continuing to find ways to make sure we execute on that talent.
In terms of
that,
I know what you're talking about.
Yep.
But you haven't really made all the decisions yet. But is there a timeline in your mind of when you would like to have some of that in, or would you be looking internally, externally? How's all of that look?
Yeah, no. I mean, there isn't, I don't have a specific answer for any of that because I really do trust the group that we have. I mean, and I think Thad would say this too. Our jobs have been. My job is to shepherd the growth and development of a lot of people in our baseball operation who can contribute to a lot of decisions. And the fun part in watching people grow and develop over time is that you see them in that space and able to contribute to those. And we have a handful of people that have done negotiations with agents and negotiations with other teams, and we have a number of people that have played roles in minor league free agent recruiting and all the things that you would typically just have done maybe 20 years ago. Just my position alone would have most of those conversations, and then ultimately that has grown over time. So I don't have a specific plan for any of that. I believe in the group that we have, but I also we have to stay open-minded ourselves always to think about how can we bring in different ideas and perspectives. I never want to get stale in that way, and that may come from different roles across different aspects of our baseball operation. It's always going to come across some conversations around our coaching staff, so we'll continue to think about that.
So moving forward then, what would be your first priority of business?
Well, I think right now, obviously, we're truly now into the off season, right? There's a process here. Free agency doesn't begin for a while. There isn't the typical roster management stuff that happens right now. The first goal of business is to work on what we need internally for our staff, right? So now we'll kind of reset this. Obviously, major league coaching staffs typically start that process around now, and other teams are underway in that too. So that will likely be first order of business to answer your question, and then continuing to evolve the group that we have.
Can we pause right there? I actually have Rocco, a window for the writers. You just want to jump on a quick call, and then maybe can you work with Derek on a couple of duty? I know you wanted to.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Why don't you go in front of the backdrop here? Maybe the writers that
Okay.
want Rocco on speakerphone will go in this back corner over here.
Yeah, you can play better in day games, yeah.
It's a day game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Here, is that all right?
Yeah.
Stay where, keep the chair here?
Well, it's standing up, so we almost pushed the. You want to grab the other side and just move it back a little bit?
I'm sorry. We're going back to. No, we're not. We're seeing. Even though we didn't really.
Not that I asked him, otherwise I just think that's like gathering what I've gathered.
You didn't need to come in. No, I mean, like,
Like, I don't know how,
they
like,
said.
even for him, like, to take the next opportunity.
Or Dustin.
The fact that you don't have it, don't worry about it.
I have one.
No.
We might be doing a while. All right. So I should